Hi everyone, welcome to Lost and Found at the Movies and this first program of 2021. We have a jam-packed program, but before we get started, I wanted to say a few words of thanks, first of all, to all the members of the Library Foundation and also to the Hollywood Foreign Press Association, whose generous support makes this program possible. I wanted to also say a few words about how this program called Rebels and Revolutionaries came together. Like many people, I spent a lot of 2020 reflecting on what was happening in the world and in this country amidst a pandemic, a continued assault on democracy, and a social uprising around racial justice. That sort of led me to think about how the spirit of rebellion expresses itself in cinema in general, and also in filmmakers. I think movies are rebellious by their nature. They're often subversive, they reframe or challenge prevailing values, and there may not be a more visceral, emotional way of affirming people power, whether that's individual or collective. So tonight's program has 4 parts. Each is a different way of looking or thinking about rebels and revolutionaries. And obviously that is a pretty broad idea, so it's open to interpretation. Film history often calls something revolutionary when it's just never been done before.
You ain't heard nothing yet.
Like a close-up, or deep focus, or a jump cut. People say Psycho was revolutionary for a horror film. It's also revolutionary for killing off its protagonist 45 minutes into the film and for flushing a toilet. But I'm talking about the idea of rebellion in movies. Although that's a broad canvas too, because in truth, there's a rebel in almost every movie. That's kind of how movies work, right? We like characters with a rebellious streak. Plenty of cinema revolts are, well, big. The spirit of mass protests, uprisings, and revolution appears in countless films from all around the world.
We understand that the issue is the land.
I know you're angry! I'm angry!
It's not just extraordinary figures from history. Maybe because we all want to believe in the people power in ourselves, movies find the rebellious spirit in ordinary, everyday people.
Captain, my captain.
Sit down, Mr. Anderson. You hear me? Sit down.
My name is Paikia Apidana, and I come from a long line of chiefs.
How many great movie moments are acts of rebellion?
Let me get this straight, lady.
All right, then, we'll be off. Nice chatting.
I want you to get up right now and go to the window, open it, and stick your head out and yell, "I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not gonna take this anymore!"
Same fight. Equisapiens, let's be out.
Cinema rebellions can be sweeping, grandiose, but they can also be subtle and quiet. Even cooking a dinner can be an act of rebellion. But let's face it, the best rebels are the teenage rebels. After all, it's what teenagers do. Almost as if it's not conscious, it's intuitive, it's baked into their DNA. And that brings us to part 1 of the program, Children of the Revolution. One of the first things that came to mind when I thought about rebellions was a story that a filmmaker friend, Perkins, told me. She grew up on a commune in Tennessee called The Farm. And it was a story about a natural phase that all kids go through. When they rebel against their parents, they assert their identity in contrast to the community and adults around them. But what does it mean to rebel against your parents when your parents belong to the most storied rebel generation of the 20th century? I asked Mo to tell that story, and she created this piece called Suits.
When my older brother turned 14, he started to wear suits. Sometimes he would even wear a tie. And it shook our household. It shook our whole community. All of the grown-ups in our lives flipped out. And here's why. I was born and raised on a commune called the Farm. It is historically significant as the largest, longest-running commune in American history. It was started in the late 60s in San Francisco. There was a lot of upheaval, a lot of distrust with government, kind of mirroring our own time. There were clashes with the police, and people were getting interested in social experiments. They were looking to do things differently than their parents had done them. My mom tells me that at a certain point, you could go to Golden Gate Park on any given Sunday, and it would just be full of people looking for gurus and gurus sitting under trees. My parents found their community with a group of people who were following a guy named Stephen Gaskin. It started as a group of about 60 people who would gather with Stephen and talk about their idealized world. It grew from there to a group of 300, and these 300, these were people in their 20s. 300 sold everything they had in the world, which for most of them was not much. They bought buses and they set out from San Francisco to explore America and form their own idealized utopia, the Farm. And what they were able to achieve, I think, was actually pretty impressive. They, over the course of 20 some odd years, housed, clothed, and fed hundreds of families with no money. They grew their own food. They were experimental socially in lots of ways. They had group housing with 4 or 5 families to a household. They were vegan before vegan was a thing. And they are thought of as the start of what is now the kind of American midwifery movement. And there were lots and lots of children, including myself. As far as kids were concerned, I think that they played a key role in the commune's long-term goals. The Farm grown-ups saw the kids as like the future, that they were raising these tiny, enlightened human beings who were going to carry on the mission of the Farm and go out and be the example of what was possible. So as a kid growing up in that, it was kind of a mixed experience. On one hand, I think of my childhood as almost a feral childhood. I was barefoot constantly, running around in the woods with these packs of kids. There was a lot of freedom. But on the flip side, there was this expectation. I remember thinking very deeply at like 6 years old what I personally was going to do to save the world. And the commune organized around that. As kindergartners, we showed up with floor mats to school because we were expected to meditate. Instead of Girl Scouts or Boy Scouts, they had Zen troops. So you can see there was a lot of focus on raising the children to be kind of the mini-me's of what the commune grown-ups thought of as their revolution. And that went along, I guess, okay for a while until some of the older kids, these are kids who either were born on the caravan or were toddlers when the commune was first getting started, these kids started to grow up. They started to hit puberty, and that's when things got complicated. The Farm was always really into music. They had a rock band. I think Steven was in the rock band at one point. And there's a Grateful Dead song that everybody said was about Stephen, Saint Stephen. So music was very much a part of commune life, but it was a specific kind of music. I'm going to go ahead and say it was deeply hippie. And as these teenagers were coming up, they were interested in music, but they were not interested in the music of their parents. And somehow they started to get their hands on kind of a new sound. I know my brother says that it was his best friend Robley who went to visit his father in San Francisco for a week and came back with the knowledge of a band called The Clash. I've been told that there were teenagers who would come and stay at the Farm for a short time and that they brought some music. But however it got there, the teenagers of the commune discovered early punk rock. For these kids who had grown up in the Tennessee woods, this music was so full of energy. It was assertive, it was angsty, and it was so cool. I'm sure it was a bonus that their parents hated it. They thought it was angry. They thought it was aggressive. My father, who's a lifelong atheist, in a fight with my brother, called it devil music. It didn't take long before these kids who were so in love with this music wanted to dress like the bands. We didn't have money as kids. We got our clothes from a barrel marked with our age and size, but they scrounged up birthday money from grandparents, they hitchhiked into town, they went to thrift stores, they dumpster dived, anything they could do to get a hold of some clothes. They bought suits, they got ties, they got black jackets, and they cut their hair. Eventually they went from looking like this to looking like this. I wish I could tell you that my parents and the other grown-ups who in their day had been ridiculed for their unorthodox hairstyles, their music, their way of dressing, had figured it out when it was their turn, but they didn't. It's hard to convey what a big deal it was for them. The suits, the tie, they symbolized everything that they'd left behind, and now their kids were marching around in the Tennessee woods wearing suits and ties. There were big meetings, people were called out, people were pressured to take out their earrings or not to play certain music, but ultimately it never really did get resolved. They had raised these children to be rebels. They just never expected the rebellion to turn on them. When I look back at that time, the commune's gone. I'm a mom, I've got my own kid. I am amazed to think about how much they were just like each other and they just couldn't see each other over a generational divide.
Saint Stephen with a rose, in and out of the garden he goes. Country
Mo has been writing a pilot for an episodic series about these experiences growing up on the farm, and it's fantastic. So I consider this an appetizer for many more stories to come when that gets made. Part 2 of the program brings us to the other side of the world completely. It's hard to make your first feature anywhere, but try making films about one of the world's most deeply conservative patriarchal societies when you're a woman filmmaker, forbidden from doing many of the things you need to do to make a film. Against those odds, Haifaa Mansour became the first person, man or woman, to direct a film made entirely in Saudi Arabia. Her film Wajda premiered at Venice in 2012 and went on to great acclaim. And then after making 2 films here, including Mary Shelley, she returned to her Saudi roots to make The Perfect Candidate, which also premiered in Venice and then played at Sundance. In interviews and profiles, Haifaa is often referred to as a rebel, so I started by asking her about growing up in a small town and becoming a storyteller at an early age with very few opportunities to women, much less women artists.
I started telling stories since I was little. Like in school, I used to write plays and direct them for girls. And it was like, Saudi Arabia was very conservative, almost like Taliban. So if you pray, you go to heaven. If you don't, you go to hell. That is exactly like the main theme. But I tried to bring a little bit contemporary life from our daily interaction as kids. And that resonated with a lot of the girls in the school. So they would laugh when I write a joke or something. So it gave me that power. Just like I matter. It gave me that self-respect and self-esteem feeling. I grew up in a small town in Saudi Arabia and you know, any small town in the world is very boring and limited, right? It's let alone Saudi Arabia. So, and my father used to bring films from the Blockbuster, and I watch a lot of mainstream cinema, not art house but there was a freedom in this. Like I traveled, I went everywhere. I went to Colorado, to China, India, and that what made me associate cinema with is always to free yourself from constraints around you. And I think in the Middle East, what we have is what really slows us down is our values. We cling to very traditional values because we are traditional and because of religion and all that. And I think it is very important for us to free ourselves at heart from those constraints. And because a lot of them are very sexist and there is a lot of racism going in the society, classism going in the society. For me, the act of rebellion is really deconstructing those values and trying to free ourselves to find a way to be happier some way and embrace values that are, I don't want to say modern, but more respects our humanity. And my parents are like very small town people. They didn't speak English. I didn't grow up like going around the world or anything, but there's something in them. They were just liberal. They were very progressive. And my father was very secular. He never and he wouldn't tell me to do this or not to do that, because I'm a girl. And we always have access to movies and music. And I always felt like my life at home is very much different than my surroundings.
Did you feel any awareness of the idea of role models, whether it was around what it meant to be a girl, to be a woman in your culture, or anything else that through popular culture felt like a role model?
Role model for me is a little like, it makes me a little nervous, just because I grow up in a place like you have to follow someone else. We are not like everybody else, and everybody who should find their own calling in life. And in that way, maybe my protagonists are role models. They're very flawed. They are not like the perfect people, but they try to find their own, what makes them happy. And that is, for me, what is important for women from the Middle East. We should not dress all the same. We should not regard our sexuality or being the same. We are individual, and everybody has to go through this self-discovery journey, which is very hard if you are surrounded by very much deep-rooted tradition and religion that is very heavy and present in everyday life, that tells you this is your identity and this is who you are. This is how you should project yourself, and this is how you should act. And that is why it's amazing when you go to the Middle East and the Arab world in particular. There is a clear divide between the public persona that people project and when you go to their homes. In their homes, they dance and they flirt and they're fluid. But once they're outside, they're just like, they have to be very, they give you the image that you expect from them. The story of Wadda is about this very spirited girl who wants just to get a green bicycle to race her neighbor boy, and everybody was telling her, no, you can't ride it, because of her physicality, because of her religion, because of all what surrounds women from a very young age, what they are told to be. And then she finds there is a Quran recitation competition with a cash prize. So she gets there and to get the bicycle, and it's all about her self-discovery journey, and her mom, who is the ultimate Saudi role model, let's say, who is really beautiful, wants to satisfy her husband. She cooks, she looks nice, and she did everything. And then at the end, she was taken for granted and never appreciated for all the sacrifice of denying her individuality and what she really wants to do for herself. So the relationship between the mother and daughter also is a big theme in the film.
Let me ask a little bit more about the making of Wajda. Can you talk about what it is that you could or couldn't do, and then how you got around that?
The one most difficult thing is and for me, even because I'm a first time filmmaker at the time, is just not being able to be with the crew. The country was segregated, so men and women weren't able to be on the same space. And I wasn't, as a woman, supposed to be in the street directing or being present, just working in public. So I had a van, and I had a walkie-talkie and a monitor. So and I would tell everybody communicate now, as if I'm directing from here. It was really tough for me to understand, if you are as a filmmaker, you don't see the space to do the blocking and to do that. And sometimes I would go when it is really dark and nobody see, and just figure out the space and where to put the actors and all that. The Perfect Candidate is about a young woman who tries to run for a political office all by accident, and in a conservative place where people don't take her really seriously. And again, it's a self-discovery journey where she understands not only her position in life, but also understands her power and where it comes from.
ما شاء الله يا دكتور، أنا ما خبرك تحبين الأضواء. على العموم حنا يسعدنا انضمامك وحنا ندعم مشاركة المرأة، وبما أنك من العائلة حبيت أعطيك نصيحة بسيطة. الموضوع اللي أنت داخلة فيه ترى جدا صعب، مو بسهل، خصوصا بالنسبة لشابة مثلك، والشيء هذا لازم تكونين حريصة، مو معناته إنك أنت ما أنت قدها.
It starts with a woman who's driving a car and supposedly in the driving seat, but she's completely veiled. She's like she's anonymous almost. Like Saudi women, there are a lot of things that aren't. They can travel alone, they can start business, they can drive, but the percentage of women who are doing that is not very big. The film also captured a society in motion, a society that is changing. There are so many things that are happening, and how women are positioning themselves to that change, how they are benefiting from it, or like shy away from it. And at the beginning, the character is really, she wanted to be a doctor because her parents were artists, and artists are not respected in the society, and she wanted to gain that respect.
سلامات ما يشوف شاب.
الله يسلمك ما يجيك.
اسمعني شو اسمك؟
أنا قال لكم لا تجيبوني المستشفى هذا اللي فيه حريم.
But she understood, like when she tried to do all that, exactly like the mother in Wajda, she was confronted with a society that tells her, no matter what you do, you will not be, you are a woman and that's it. And that is when that tipped, like and that is when she tried to now embrace those rebellious values that she inherited from her family and upbringing, and became true to herself.
Well, it seems to me that the great act of rebellion, or at least that it has to be to some degree, would be this idea of a woman running for political office, albeit a small local position. She has to teach herself how to do this.
And for her, it's like campaigning and all that. She goes online and just like tries to find, like, this is the first step you have. It is like how to do, like everybody now, like they go online to find how to build a cabin. She really did win. And the winning in her is like understanding what it means to have a voice and fight for it. And that is very important. One of the regulations when women started like running for office, when they allowed that, is like they cannot be with men in the same room. So they have the tent, like a big tent for election, and then she has to be in an adjacent room, and then she has to have a monitor, and like from the room next door, she's talking to men.
السلام عليكم مساكم الله بالخير جميعا. شكرا جزيلا على حضوركم الليلة. أكيد أغلبكم يعرف أني دخلت في الانتخابات البلدية المحلية. مع أني ما أقدر أكلمكم وجها لوجه، بس أبي أوضح لكم أن انتخابي مهم لكل شخص فيكم.
But it is way more frustrating for this candidate to talk to those people who are trying not to take her seriously and completely excluding her, and she needed to be present. Like, I'm not going to be on TV. I'm not going to have a virtual existence for the rest of my life. It wasn't even conscious for her. It was really like that drove her, that frustration drove her to be there present in person.
I think one of the reasons it's quite empowering is there's a progression of how the veil is used. As you said at the beginning, when she's driving a car, she's wearing a veil. It becomes a little bit less so over the course of the film, presumably as she finds her identity. How did you see the use of the veil in the film, and how does that reflect your attitudes towards what that means in Saudi culture and in Arab culture?
Well, I think the veil is one of the most important things. Since you are born as a woman in the Middle East, you are told your body has to be covered and your body has to be presented in a certain way. And any act of rebellion against that will be met with a harsh punishment. A lot of Muslim women veil just because they think it is part of their identity. Yes, it is part of the religious identity. It is part of the political religious agenda of how to present women, but it does not reflect how women themselves want to represent themselves, and does not represent if the women are willingly joining that political religious movement. You are born into it, whether you want it or not. That's who you are. I think it is very important for us Muslim women to move away from this, like, it's also blaming the victim. If you are not covered, or if you are not veiled and you are harassed, don't blame anybody else but yourself. That is all the time. And it is just like, it is very damaging for women's psychology. And a lot of women don't even understand how it is damaging for them. And it is very sad. Yeah, so for me, Maryam was like veiled, and she tried to fit that image. And then an awakening of who she is when people are trying to undermine her. She understood what it means to be a person and wanted to be present and real, not only as an image, not only as a silhouette, as an individual.
هدوا لو سمحتوا. خلاص كفاية. أنا مرشحة رسمية ولازم تحترمون المرشحين سواء كانوا رجال ولا نساء.
Let me ask you about, real quick, about Mary Shelley, which in some ways feels like a very different film in that it is not shot in Saudi Arabia. And yet at the same time, as I was thinking through this, is there a more rebellious spirit in literature at that time? She seems like, Mary Shelley seems like, you know, so much in keeping with the women who you tell stories about.
When they sent it to me, I was like, do they know from Saudi Arabia? This is like a period film about an English woman that maybe I'm not really familiar with. But when they sent me the script and I read the story, I really understand her pain. As a woman to be dismissed only because of your gender and age, I understood where she comes from as a character. And a lot of people think the book is very masculine, and a young woman wrote it because of all what she went through, from losing a child, an exhausting relationship with her husband, and trying to fill the legacy that she inherited from her parents. So there is so much into that book that is all coming from her life.
You know, what feels like almost the absurdly most rebellious act is the idea that she as a woman can own the story that she tells. It seems to me like it's a question of authorship as well too, that she was expressing herself as a human being, as a person, and that she had a right to own that story, and you know, which is almost taken away from her, right? The idea that story can't belong to her.
Absolutely. They told her, like, they will take her name and that Percy Shelley will have to write the introduction, alluding that it is maybe work of his, and they don't want to put her name on it.
Curious subject matter for a young lady, wouldn't you say? And when that young lady just happens to be the wife, companion of Mr. Shelley.
Are you suggesting the work belongs to Mr. Shelley?
And one of the most amazing moments is like her father is like, who really didn't like that she went with Percy. To be proud of her is really a big moment in Mary Shelley's life. You cannot contain art. Once you open it up, it is elusive. You cannot really capture it, and people will always try to find a way to express themselves. But I think it is the power will come with entertainment. Is really, you have to make films that reach a lot of people, and make films that very true to who we are, to change people. We should not, as a filmmakers, lose the power of audience, like The Perfect Candidate or Wajda. I hope they are entertaining, they're funny, they have humor, their music, because I feel it is very important to touch people's hearts. The power also in cinema, like giving me that space where I can see the whole world and challenge you in a way that is very exciting and very entertaining and very touching.
We've arrived at part 3. It seemed only right in a program about rebels and revolutionaries to find a bona fide revolutionary here in the US, and I immediately thought of a documentary called American Revolutionary, which is a fascinating story of a remarkable woman, Grace Lee Boggs. The director is Grace Lee, a different Grace Lee, who happens to also be a friend from film school, so I knew a little bit about her relationship to the film and to her subject. And I was hoping to get at something that has always been interesting to me, and that's how the process of making a film, spending so much time with the material, changes the filmmaker themselves. So if you're a filmmaker who has chronicled this incredible revolutionary and philosopher, and then subsequently a group of activists, organizers, and women of color entering politics, which is the subject of the POV series, and She Could Be Next, that Grace co-directed, how does that change you? How do you evolve your ideas about activism and revolution?
I'm not sure why I am who I am. I think it does have something to do with the fact that I was born female and born Chinese. I'm not sure what that is, but I have to think that through. And I thought that maybe in our discussions we would be able to explore that. Yeah.
It all started with a simple conversation. I first met Grace Lee Boggs while making another film called The Grace Lee Project.
My name is Grace Lee.
Hi, I'm Grace Lee. My name is Grace Lee.
Which explores my incredibly common Asian American name and the myth of Asian Americans as the model minority. I happened to be walking the hallways of UCLA, where I was a film student. I saw a flyer advertising Grace Lee Boggs, who was coming to campus. Now, I had a college history professor who had once told me about this socialist philosopher who shared my name, and I realized that it was her. I remember walking into the meeting she was having with a small group of students and was struck by this 80-something woman with this shock of white hair speaking with a New England accent.
Let me tell you how I became an activist.
I went up to her afterwards and said, "I'm making a film about women named Grace Lee, and I'd love to interview you." She seemed intrigued and countered with, "Well, then you should come to Detroit." So that's what we did. We ended up staying for 5 days, just filming whatever we could and soaking up Grace's community and the city. I knew immediately that Grace Lee Boggs merited a separate film from the Grace Lee Project. It turns out that Grace has been trying to wage a revolution in the United States for the past 70 years. She's been a Marxist theoretician, a Black Power activist, and has a thick FBI file. I wanted to understand how this American-born daughter of Chinese immigrants devoted her life to being both an activist and philosopher, and how she became rooted in Detroit's Black community. She had this kind of humanistic, expansive view of movements and history. Her own story felt so much a part of the American history I had learned about, but also completely hidden, which is why her being Asian American also resonated. Coming from the Midwest, from a Korean immigrant household, I had a kind of dual existence growing up. At home and with my parents' Korean community, and then school, which was all-American, Midwest, kind of a heartland experience. I was an introvert, but also very curious. And journalism was an excuse to ask questions and get a different kind of knowledge from people than what's available in books. Over the years, after that first trip to Detroit, I would go back every so often and hang out and watch Grace. I was also blown away by Detroit, which I only came to know through the lens of Grace Lee Boggs. When you see the broken down buildings of deindustrialization and white flight, it's easy to slip into the ruin-porn view of the place. But then Grace would say things like, "Where people see empty lots and devastation, I see a space for urban gardens or urban farmland." And then you start to understand the city as a site of resilience. We always think about these big movements, protests, and marches in terms of changing policy and government. But with her, I realized conversation can be the building block of creating a movement, creating something new.
The radical movement has overemphasized the role of activism and underestimated the role of reflection.
We joked about creating a little red book of Grace Lee Boggs quotations, stuff you want to carry around with you for any situation.
I think I can get it perfect and then do it, as opposed to knowing that you do it by making mistakes.
Yeah, you make your path by walking.
On a basic level, the film is an ongoing conversation with Grace Lee Boggs about the evolving nature of revolution, whether that's in regard to social movements happening within her lifetime, or whether it's evolution through which she sees the city of Detroit or within herself. I think a lot about her distinctions between riot, rebellion, and revolution.
I asked you to think about your calling it a riot.
What would you call it?
We in Detroit called it the rebellion.
The rebellion.
It was a rising up, it was a standing up. It's the protest by a people against injustice.
Rebellion as an outburst of anger, an acting out an injustice that can no longer be contained. But you need that rebellion to lead to something more transformational, which brings us to revolution and how evolution is part of that. This evolutionary process is so key to not just her, but it's an accessible way of also thinking about how change actually happens. Coming back to the personal, it starts small. It starts with acknowledging how you first need to transform yourself in order to transform the world. I think Grace embodied the need for both.
The Montgomery bus boycott was about not only transforming the system, but an example of how we ourselves change in the process of changing the system.
The combination of activism and reflection is what is so powerful. That's one reason why I made this film. I was interested in these questions about how do you sustain a life of activism? How do you keep from getting burned out? With all of this chaos in the world, how do you make sense of it all? It wasn't until after spending so much time with Grace Lee Boggs that I understood how movement organizing is how change happens. And the best organizers are never the ones taking up the spotlight. And they are often women of color who are even more hidden. When we were filming in Georgia, the organizers are a huge part of And She Could Be Next. It's validating to see how Georgia became the story of the 2020 election. The organizers, especially Black women, but also Asian Americans and Latinx communities mobilizing their folks. There's this montage at the beginning of And She Could Be Next of Black women and other women of color organizers throughout history. And I said, we have to use this clip of Grace Lee Boggs talking about the new American majority that I had shot in 2010.
With people of color becoming the new American majority, how are we going to create a new vision for this country?
I had been thinking about that term since then. I'm also part of this new American majority.
I think it's because I grew to love Detroit and to feel responsible for Detroit that I was able to grow.
And this thing about taking responsibility for the thing you care about, that's how you grow to love it. That's really stayed with me. I realized that in this time of reflection and reckoning, coming out of 2020, that I'm responsible for my communities, which is why I've been more comfortable becoming more active, like creating a community of Asian American documentary filmmakers or criticizing the institutions that have helped me have a career. Part of it comes from age and feeling more secure about what I say and do, but it's also about being a citizen of the world. You don't just wait for somebody else to change it for you.
As I have grown older, I think more in terms of centuries, whereas 8 or 9 years ago, I was only talking about decades.
Hearing that gave me some comfort because I know the revolution is not happening overnight. I'm part of a movement that is constantly moving forward and being pushed back. If I can push it forward a little bit more from where Grace and others took it, I'll be satisfied. I think that's why it's been so instructive to think about evolution and my own evolution in having made the film and then being influenced by her. I mean, meeting Grace changed my life. Making the film also solidified why I tell stories. That storytelling, just like conversation, is another form of activism. We're still in the midst of this traumatic experience of 2020, reflecting back on what all this means. I think about how we'll do things differently because everything is broken. It goes back to conversation as an active revolution, as activism, right? Like, let's just start talking about these ideas first. As Grace says in the film, you never know where a conversation is going to take you. We are making our path by walking. We're all going to make our own paths in a different way, and we have to make our own way from where we are at this moment.
So as I mentioned, Grace and I know each other from our days at UCLA Film School, and that brings us to the final part of the program tonight, a story that is a quintessential part of the history of UCLA and of Los Angeles and of American cinema. And that's the story of a collective of Black filmmakers who studied at UCLA beginning in the late 1960s, a group that has since been called the LA Rebellion. I was eager to include this in the program because it's a story and a body of work that is vastly underappreciated and that more people should know about. The film scholar Clyde Taylor said of the work that it sought to perform the revolutionary act of humanizing Black people on screen. And although a few films, notably Killer of Sheep and Daughters of the Dust, eventually garnered attention, there are many more films and filmmakers for whom recognition is long overdue. But when I was a student at UCLA, a school that heralded its own independence, it was a story that was marginalized even in our experience there. One of the key contributors and leading artists of the LA Rebellion was there every day on staff, and that's Billy Woodberry. While he was teaching at Cal Arts, he also ran the equipment office at UCLA, just as Haile Garima had years before. And I, for one, didn't fully appreciate what that meant. Although you could certainly reserve equipment there, it was also a space for conversation and to encounter the values of that group and the collectivity and the sense of purpose in filmmaking. So I knew Billy had made a film called Bless Their Little Hearts, but it was hard to see, and in fact I didn't see it until years later when it was restored by the UCLA Film and Television Archive and added to the Library of Congress's National Registry of Films, and then released by Milestone Films, where it's now available for anybody to see on disc or on streaming. And it's a beautiful, beautiful film that you'll never forget. So I spoke to Billy about that and about his experience as part of the group. I would love to start by kind of going back and asking you about how you became interested in film and the circumstances that led you to UCLA in the first place. You'd grown up in Texas, but you'd come to California. You were a student at Cal State LA, working on your BA. So I wanted to start by asking kind of, what was your sense of what you wanted to do at that point in your life? And then how did that lead you to taking a summer course on Cuba that kind of changed your path or clarified your path, I guess, in some ways?
I think what happened is maybe I inadvertently in that summer course and subsequently enrolling in this program in Latin American Studies for Masters, that I might have, that might have been how I came to the awareness, along with other things I was doing in my life, other things I was studying outside of school, other activities. That's how I think I came to the realization that one could actually study film in graduate school, and that the program for this existed. During my studies, I met a man. His name is Mario da Silva. He uses Mario Vieira now. That's his name. But he was a student at UCLA. He had come from Brazil, gone to Los Angeles City College, then gone, like Charles Burnett, who he knew. He went to UCLA to do an undergraduate degree, and he came with the purpose and the idea that he loved cinema and he would study cinema. And he was a very gifted filmmaker, and I met him just as he was finishing his master's in UCLA Film School. The idea didn't occur to me that it was in any way a sure professional, vocational decision. It was something I discovered that I could study, that I could learn, and that I could maybe devise ways to employ it in my life, in my ideas about, politics, society, change, all of those things. But I was new in a lot of ways to all of that.
Going back to that summer course on Cuba, some of the Latin American studies courses, the cinemas of those countries suggested a certain possibility for film that embraced, an awareness of social justice and the communicative power of film. So what were some of the things that fueled your sense of what was possible through filmmaking?
I think in the Cuban cinema and in the Brazilian cinema of the time, and in Bolivia, and obviously in Argentina, the project of Fernando Solanas and Getino, they're quite upfront in their manifesto about this. It's a cinema with a political agenda and position. It's a cinema that participates in creating a radical analysis of the structure of society and how to transform it. And I was thinking on a more modest level, in a way, maybe what sustained myself and many others, even if we needed to adapt in a way those lessons to our own context and reality. Okay, you find the inspiration, you find examples, wonderful examples, that are challenging and that are exciting, you know. But I think we had, coming to sort of school and consciousness at that time, we had the presence in our midst among our colleagues and our fellow students, and that we had the awareness of a larger purpose, because it's the time of the Vietnam War, it's the time of the Black consciousness movement, it's post the Civil Rights movement, it's post the Watts Rebellion, it's post all of those things. So there was a lot of fermentation and a lot of varied, you know what I mean, political projects and cultural projects that was the atmosphere outside and in and around the context of my studying, right? And so those films provided that. The other thing is, to be blunt, one thing that one saw even in the Cinema Novo in Brazil, which also has an African-derived population that has a similar history in terms of being imported from the African continent to these places and these plantations and this. And at the same time, I saw the filming and the placing of those figures, those Black figures, in the cinema in a way that didn't exist in the United States. And okay, there were differences, but at the same time, there was some similarities, and one could see that one was not seeing that realized in the American context. And that was inspiring. That was provoking. That gave you something to think about, somewhere to go. So you gained a political consciousness with that. Political people of different political, radical political thinking were around. So in 1966, if you want to see a movie, okay, you see the movie later. But the big movie for many people, young people, the Black Panther Party and many others, was the Battle of Algiers, okay? But in that time, you didn't just see a movie and then it's just a movie. These movies suggested they was something other than that. They might have been something other than that. So you wanted to learn, what the hell were they talking about? What was really the story they were talking about?
Yeah, it leads to a culture of conversation amongst you and many of the other students. You arrived at a time when kind of, I guess, that there were already Charles Burnett, Haile Gerima, Larry Clark, Tashumi Gabriel were ahead of you in the program. And I wonder, like, as you arrived, to what degree you were aware of them, to what degree they offered, some kind of mentorship or model for what it is that you thought you could create through your own work.
The three strong personalities at the time when I arrived were Haile Gerima, Larry Clark, and Charles. They had a kind of connection because if Charles Burnett was the teaching assistant for Haile Gerima in the first year of making film. By the time I arrived, Haile was a very, very popular teaching assistant for a sizable class of Black students and others. But I remember they had a program of the films of the Black students in Project One. And I came, like many people, even some colleagues like John Simmons, who went to USC. We all sort of showed up there to see what they were doing, So it was the first glimpse of some of those people. So eventually I needed to figure out where I connected, where I fit in, who I connected with. And Mario had suggested that the really important person to know among that group, in his opinion, was Charles Burnett, because he had worked on Charles Burnett's second film and they knew each other and respected each other. And he thought that Charles Burnett he's connected in a way to this Black community in Watts. It took some time to meet him because he was making his film and he was working full time and he only came in the evenings. And the first lesson you learn is that, okay, the way it works is you learn by working on films. And when you work on the film, in a way you're paying forward because you will need people to work on your film. And again, it's an opportunity to learn. You don't care if you have to be the guy who carries the cases, whatever. You're present and you can learn. Watch and learn, okay? And that's how I met a lot of them. Not all of us always worked together, but it was a common value. It was a common ethic that you did that. And among the Black students and projects of that, they had the idea always that they should take the knowledge that they're gaining and they should take it to the community. And they had this, it's called PASLA, Performing Arts. And it was quite wise because a lot of the actors that appear in the films associated with this LA rebellion from Without Films, they came from this workshop. They came from, they began like us. The thing we had was a lot of goodwill, understanding, patience, and complicity with people who were willing to do that. We had no idea that these things would last beyond their making, okay? And for a time, perhaps they didn't. Then I remember we used to have clashes about films, about ideology, about politics, about all those things. And at the same time, sometimes the person you may have a clash with ideologically, whatever, there are more practical things to know because, as Haile Garima used to say, you don't talk a film, you show a film, okay? I want to see. I don't want to listen to your talk, okay? So then that made you realize and have some humility about what you needed to do, how you needed to do it. And maybe your first audience, in a way, that you thought, okay, if they accept or they believe that I've done something worthwhile and I did my best, then that means something.
You mentioned the arguments, and actually it's interesting, so many of your colleagues mention those arguments as well too. The dialogue, the debate. Charles said you would close down restaurants getting into arguments and talks, and he said the debate was about who was making Black films, what was a Black film. Julie said something very similar. So in some ways it feels like it brought you together. And yet at the same time, as you mentioned just now, there were different ideologies, there were different perspectives on what that meant. But as you started to learn the tools of filmmaking, you were part of these conversations about what was a Black film and much more than that. So how did you feel that you wanted to apply that to how you tell stories and what stories you wanted to tell?
It's true that we had that. We used to have these discussions, and we would go to these different coffee shops, and we would be there, and we would discuss and talk. And it wasn't always a conflict. There could be differences, but it propelled the conversation. People, at the time, you can start to think, oh, what is a revolutionary film? Or people were thinking, what is revolutionary cinema? What is Black cinema, this kind of thing. The different ideas about what to make a film about, how to make a film, all of it somehow connected to the Black cultural, political, social thing. Probably the variety and heterogeneity of approach and this kind of thing, and the results, they differ, and that probably is richer than if they all were the same. Because we were granted permission in a way by those films that we talked about earlier, this Latin American cinema, the new cinemas of the world, and some maybe not so new, but the ones that vary. Satyajit Ray, there's some of the Japanese classics and Japanese directors and the radical ones of the present, Oshima, and the African cinema for sure. Usman Sembène came to the school. He was taught by this man, Alicio Taylor, who was the first black professor in the school. And we saw and heard him, and we watched the films. And when they would play a Armando Olmi film at Fox Venice or one of those places, we would arrive and say, okay, all 8 of us are here. So, and it was an Egyptian guy and Charles and me and a few other guys who liked that stuff. So maybe my experience and my interest is not exactly that of all the colleagues, but I think our connection, our way to get our thing together was special because there's a kind of special bond and obligation, in a way, we felt, to support each other. So I thought, okay, I will make a movie about working class people, but a woman who works and a small boy who's probably going to end in the same place and this kind of thing. And then I found a story by Langston Hughes, so I decided, okay, I'll make something with that. And then I tried to make it in a way that made it mean something as a film. That was the deal. And I mean, most people, they thought it was good. It was worthwhile. It was different. It was from what they were doing. Some of them thought it was maybe not whatever enough, but that was not the consensus. And from the beginning, I was trying to make what I could make at the time.
That seems like a good way to bring up the collaboration that you had with Charles, because you mentioned in talking about the Langston Hughes story that was your short film, The Pocketbook. And I gather from what you've said before that that Charles had worked with you and talked to you about the ending of that film. And that led to a collaboration that extended into Bless Their Little Hearts over many years. And I love the way that you talk about the time you spent with him. It just felt like a very artistic kinship as well.
What happened was when I was making that movie, the first shooting of the aftermath of the purse snatching of the boy and the old lady, it didn't work well. And when we looked at it, okay, we should do it again and I'll help you do it. I decided, well, let's do it. Let's see if we can do it better. So we did. We restaged it inside my apartment at the time. And it was better. It was better.
But you don't snatch pocketbooks from folks that works as hard as I do. You getting shoes like that? You might find them shoes pinch your toes, boy.
And then I went to editing that, and he was always editing that film, The Horse, or editing The Killer of Sheep. He used to come to my place, come to our apartment, because I used to take the projector and take some films from the collection or the library, and I used to project them at my house. So sometimes we watch the film, sometimes we watch his film, or we watch some other friend's film. There was a special classical music store in Beverly Hills that he knew. So he'd go there and he'd get the record and he would take it and listen to it, that kind of thing. But that's normal. I mean, it's part of getting to know somebody, know what informs their taste, their interests, those things, you know. And then we started to think, what would I do as the third film? And so I was thinking of everything. And then eventually, when I was not coming up with this film, he said to me, I have a story for you. And I have this idea. So I will write it and I will give it to you. And then we do that. In fact, when he gave me the story, this kind of people you like is what he called it, right?
What was it about the story, the way that you saw it, the way that it had a preoccupation with unemployment, marriage relations, Charlie's sense of masculinity, all these ideas that are part of Bless Their Little Heart. What were the things that you really felt invested in and felt like, oh, this is the film that I want to spend a good deal of my life making?
One is I was interested in that issue, that subject, theoretically, politically, and I understood something about that. The film, the story that he gives me, I understood something about it theoretically. I know people who worked practically on these things. I know something about the history of people's response to unemployment, deindustrialization, which my colleagues were thinking about and writing about in this thing. And then I had this fiction, this story that is about that. The other thing is probably because I was married, I had a small kid. I was trying to finish school and work and be more useful in terms of the family. So some of those things, like how to live in a couple, how to share, how to be present, all that, I'm probably learning that all my life, but I was in the midst of that.
One of the things that I think is so striking about the movie and beautiful is the interior space. And this speaks to, the incredible performers that you had, Nate Hardman and Casey Moore. These moments in the film where we're just observing, and there's something going on in the performer and in the character, but that requires a certain faith and confidence that this minimalism is actually doing something.
I think what happens is when you have a really good source material, and you have good people, really good people, and when you approach the shooting, like when we go on the bus, we paid the fee for 3 people. We go on the bus, me, Charles, Casey, and we don't have a permit to do that. It's a crowded bus. But when you film with a purpose, when you film, you have the guide in your head. He knows what he's filming. He knows what he wants, what we want to see. And if we're patient, that will appear. So she grabs that thing. That's the action. She knows she's doing. Why is she doing it? She's doing it because she's not even conscious of the frustration. And then the light comes. And so you have something special. It's like we didn't put the sun, we didn't do any of that. But the patience, and we were not just filming her to be on the bus. We were trying to make something. We were trying to sense the rhythm of that, the possibility of that. And the frame is there, and it appears. The one at night when she's on the bus, and she falls asleep like she's falling asleep. And we know what we're trying to get.
There's this sense of fatigue in the film so much, and it comes out, maybe most strongly in what has become a very discussed scene in the film, which is the argument and confrontation in the kitchen. I'm so tired, but it's sort of famously unscripted, although Charles had written a great deal of description for that scene, and certainly you understood the characters. Nobody knew exactly what was going to happen in that scene. And so to some degree, I wonder if you were surprised by what happens in that scene.
Yeah, I was surprised because when we started the scene, we didn't know how it would go. First take, he grabs her arm and stops the scene. You can't grab her. You have to do something else. And the next take, complete, 9 minutes something, the reel, the roll, is complete. There's no cuts. There's no Everything in there we did in second take.
No, you don't. You smell like some 10-cent perfume. That's what you smell like.
And was I surprised? Yes, I was surprised because they didn't have any dialogue. They created the dialogue. They created the movement, the three of them. The only thing I did was take out all the furniture and not talk to them. Try to talk to them, but don't talk to them because they already know. But they had a whole description of where they were in the story, what he knows, what he's hiding, what she suspects, how he might behave, how he might react, and I think, but nobody can remember that when you do it. They knew that, and then they created the dialogue.
You talk to me when you find one. You talk to me when you find one. Because I am tired, Charlie. Tired. Tired, Charlie. I'm tired. Can you hear me?
And I can't make
I'm tired, Charlie.
I'm gonna put the best I can. Them nickels and dimes. Go out there and get they add up.
Shut up.
You don't.
Then we tried to do coverage a third time. They had nothing. It's a waste of film and time. We didn't even finish it. We just stopped. And that was the whole thing.
You actually tell an interesting story about Casey Moore, who both Nate Hardman and Casey Moore are amazing actors in this film. Casey Moore was in Killer Sheep and also subsequently in Daughters of the Dust. You tell an interesting story about the feedback from the guys who were processing the film, and I ask it in the interest, this was an actor who maybe could have had an extraordinary career.
Easily. No, what happened was I needed to transfer it, and I needed the best quality transfer. I didn't want to try it at school. So I took it to Photochem, and the technicians are there, the guys who run the transfer, okay? And it was one of them that brought it to me, said, who is that actress? And what else have I seen her in? This kind of thing. Because, man, she's great. She's great. She was great. And I said, okay. And then another one told me the same thing. So I was pretty sure, okay, she was getting across to them, and they don't really care about your film.
You mentioned earlier kind of an interest among the group and yourself in deindustrialization. And, this is a film that forefronts at some very key moments. You use the Esther Phillips song Lost in a Dream. Mm-hmm. And it feels like the film to some degree is pointing to, a lost dream.
Yeah, that's true. People came for work. And then in the 70s, the industrial system started to change. You had in Los Angeles, immediate proximity, 3 major tire companies, and they were union jobs also. When that kind of industry started to change and to expel people and the character of the surrounding communities and that, it changed. And I knew that was happening, and they started to take down the Goodyear plant. And I thought since it's a film about a guy like that, I felt confident that many people in Los Angeles and in that part of the world, they would recognize that image.
Can I ask you just a little bit about the film, about Bless Their Little Hearts going out into the world? It was a time when there were not distribution opportunities. You even said in an interview, people say my film is like a foreign film. It's like a foreign country, but it's 20 blocks from their homes. And I think what you were getting at is a lack of curiosity, sensitivity towards seeing a part of the American story as well. For both this film, the other work that you did and continue to do, how do you think about audience for your work and the idea of who you're speaking to, and then how that work can or can't go out into the world?
I think it's true to say that at the time, the channels of distribution, the channels of circulation of film and film works and that thing, it was another period, another time, Most of the things associated with independent cinema only came in the 1980, probably, really, especially independent feature film making, something like that. That started to happen in the 1980s. Even the television was not so open in terms of this kind of work. Sometimes public television, sometimes locally, that kind of thing. It had a few openings in some theaters for 1 week. Importantly, it had the Film Forum in 1984. It was there for 1 week in the Film Forum. And it had in Boston, friends told me, it even played in Los Angeles later. It played in the Royal Theater for 1 week or something like that. And it qualified for Oscars. It's quite funny. But anyway, it did happen. But no, these films, you didn't have the same channel. You didn't have the same avenues for distribution and that kind of thing. And it was kind of foreign. Even if we were in the same country and occupying the same places, in a way, if they didn't encounter the film at their museum or at the circuit or whatever, it's foreign. It's different from what's on TV, and it's different from what's in the main theaters. So it's other than that. And it's part of maybe the slowness of the culture to open up, to change, to be aware of itself, to be aware of the sources. Sometimes another thing, as we're speaking about the library, sometimes the one source of collectors of these films and people who bought prints and made them available to the public were through libraries. New York Public Library System, even Los Angeles Public Library System, and some of the most loyal, open-minded, and creative, to my mind, people were the librarians. They used to all go to Flaherty in upstate New York. And if you went to Flaherty and they were interested in the film, you got an invitation. Now they asked to buy. So that's also part of the story.
How did you see yourself putting forward the values that came out of your group through your instruction and through the contact that you had with students? How did you feel that you were carrying forward the legacy of the LA Rebellion, in those roles?
Fortunately, I think because I had this job and I was teaching at CalArts for 30 years or something like that, I had a place where I was challenged every week to try to be current with what the new young people arriving and thinking about what they might be interested in, what I might have to give them that they're not getting in other places. So I had that, and it was very good for me to be in touch with them. Whatever I've been able to do after, in a way, is kind of a consequence of that, my interaction with them, my colleagues in context and environment that I was in. But I think UCLA, as often happens, they missed what was in their midst. Maybe they undervalued it. Maybe it's the thing of you can't be a prophet in your own hometown, right? Haile Garima, he probably won more awards than anybody in the history of UCLA. He won 6 awards in Cannes in 1975 before any of us even left school. He won 6 in Venice in 2000, whatever, with his last feature film. And there's not a single poster of one of his movies in that hallway, okay, in that thing. And that's obvious.
I know everybody asks you this question, so I'm going to try to inflect it, which is the idea that ultimately this group became called the LA Rebellion, and there are mixed feelings about that as an appropriate title. But whether you call it that or something else, was it reflective of something that was happening, something that was real and tangible for you?
I think I'll say two things. One thing is that name did not come from the group. It was not a manifesto that we made or whatever. It came later, and it came from a literary scholar and a writer about film, Clyde Taylor. So it's his creation. It's not unusual. Probably the people in the Nouvelle Vague didn't say we're Nouvelle Vague. Somebody else said that, a critic or theoretician or whatever. Cinema Novo, probably the same thing, even though a lot of them were writers and critics, and they had this concept. I think it functions in that way. So they were doing that. It was obvious, right? The first ones that Taylor wrote about, Larry Clark and Haile Garima, and that, they obviously were posing something radical and different than was happening in the cinema, in the movies at the time, in American movies and Black movies and all of that. Then when he looks at it, the fact that they made films in a variety of approaches, and it seemed a bit audacious to do that when there was no necessarily no embrace of it and permission to do it. It seems to stand out as an instance where these things coming together, including the ideas that people had, that there was something different in the work that came out of this group. And you could claim that insofar as it rejected some choices and it chose others, it was rebelling, it was refusing, it was, So that's how I understand it. And it's true, I think you can argue that, yes, they were not trying to fit in or please or whatever. They were trying to bring different kinds of stories, different kind of material, different ways, not perfect, imperfect in some cases, but they had at least the range of exploration and to attempt or experiment to do it and to carry it through and finish it. So that's probably worth considering. I've seen a number of people do graduate degrees, master's degrees, convincing themselves that there was nothing Black about these films, there was nothing radical about these films. You can read them at UCLA. They probably have them over in the library. And that's their opinion. But compared to what others were doing, is there another place that you find in the numbers, the length of film time, however you want to compare, that were seeming to go in a different way? The other thing we know is rebellion is not a revolution.
That's our show for this evening. Thanks so much for joining us. I did want to make one note. Billy alluded to how difficult it was for some of these films to find distribution. And in fact, some of them are still difficult to find. But as a result of this program, the Library Foundation has actually acquired some of these films, and they'll be available through the LA Public Library system now. So I encourage you to see some of the work that you've been hearing about. I also want to thank a couple of people, Michael Bodie, who edited this program, Kelsey McRae, who produced it, and several other people who made it possible. You'll find their names on the show card. I also would encourage you to look at the program notes, which are pretty extensive this time. You can find those on the Library Foundation website. Thanks for watching, and we hope that you'll join us for the next Lost and Found program sometime in the early spring. Thanks, everyone.
Just make my temperature